All right, time to talk to the Communications Minister, Paul Fletcher, to take us there. Here was the Prime Minister putting the social media giants on notice after Barnaby Joyce's daughter copped some online trolling.
Social media has become a coward's palace where people can just go on there, not say who they are, destroy people's lives and say the most foul and offensive things to people and do so with impunity. Now, that's not a free country where that happens. That's not right. They should have to identify who they are. And you know, the companies, if they're not going to say who they are, well, they're not a platform anymore, they're a publisher. They're a publisher.
Paul Fletcher, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Doug.
So do you agree with the Prime Minister there that Twitter and Facebook should be considered publishers rather than platforms? And what does that mean in practice?
Well, certainly what I agree with the Prime Minister about is that we need to make sure that the internet is a place where Australians can be safe. And the Prime Minister has led a very strong agenda on this, including the Online Safety Act that we've just passed through the Parliament, that amongst other things gives our E-Safety Commissioner, Julian Grant, new powers to require the platforms to hand over the identity of trolls. She's got powers to issue penalties against trolls online. But what the Prime Minister is signalling is that he's leading a government that has lent in on these issues and will continue to lean in. You know, we led the world in the News Media Bargaining Code that we passed through the Parliament earlier this year when everybody was saying it couldn't be done. We took on Facebook and Google. The outcome of that has been there are now 14 deals done by Google, 11 by Facebook. That's money flowing in to Australian news media businesses to support public interest journalism. The reason that happened was because the Prime Minister and the Treasurer led very strongly on that issue, and I worked closely with them. And the Prime Minister is reminding Australians in his comments this week of the very strong agenda we have on online safety, the act that's just passed through the Parliament, the things that we're going to do, and he's also signalling further directions that we are very committed to going forward with.
So and that's what I want to explore. When he says they should be treated as publishers, is that your view?
Well, what we have right now is a process underway through all of the Attorneys General, and indeed Michaelia Cash wrote to Mark Speakman, the New South Wales Attorney General, who's leading the process in relation to defamation law, looking at the question of what the liability should be of the platforms, Facebook, Twitter and others, if a defamatory statement is made by a person posting on those platforms. So we've recently had a High Court case, Voller, which has looked at these issues, but it confined itself, because of the facts of the case, the High Court confined itself to the question of the liability of the owner of the Facebook page. In those cases, it was news media businesses like 7 and 9. That leaves open the question of what is the responsibility of Facebook? Do they, for example, have a responsibility to assist a litigant in providing information about the identity of the person who posted the comment?
Yeah, sorry, just come back to the question. Should they be treated as publishers?
Well, that is certainly one of the options that is before us in this process. And
seems to be what the Prime Minister's saying. So do you agree with him?
Well, I agree with the Prime Minister. Yes, we need to take... we expect a stronger position from the platforms. For a long time, they've been getting away with not taking any responsibility in relation to content posted on their sites.
If they're treated as publishers, that would mean like a newspaper or a television station, they are liable for whatever's posted on Twitter or Facebook. Is that possible?
Well, what the Prime Minister is signalling is that is something that we want to look at, and there is an existing process that the Attorneys General are leading. Commonwealth Attorney General, my colleague Michaelia Cash, just this week wrote to the State Attorneys General wanting to accelerate that process.
Just to be clear on this, so you are looking at holding Twitter and Facebook liable for everything that's posted on these platforms?
Well, that is certainly one of the options that's under consideration. Amongst others could be what is their responsibility to support a private litigant who brings action. But let's go to the underlying issue here. In a whole range of ways, we are cracking down on this idea that what is posted online can be posted with impunity. So in our new Online Safety Act, there is now a power for our e-Safety Commissioner, Julian Grant, to make an order against a platform to remove cyber abuse of Australian adults. Now, it needs to meet a test of being content that would be regarded by a reasonable person as intended to harm. It needs to be menacing, harassing or offensive. So we've set an appropriate test to balance the freedom of speech issues. But under the Online Safety Act, the e-Safety Commissioner will have the power to require that a platform removes that material. She'll also have the power to go after the troll who posted it, and she's got new powers to require the platforms to provide the identity, all identity information they have. But we want to look at a broader. We want to look at a broader range of issues here, David.
Well, it sounds like it sounds like. Let me just quote what Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister, who, as I mentioned, is very upset because his daughter's been copying some awful stuff online. So he's told me he actually wants the power to fine the social media companies. He says online platforms that make money from content will say this is outrageous, that you fine us for something we didn't write. We'll say, well, it's just as outrageous as us picking up the pieces from the damage caused by your platform. So is this also something you'll look at, the power to fine Facebook and Twitter for stuff that's posted?
Well, Barnaby Joyce, as a dad, is very concerned about his daughter, and Australian mums and dads are very concerned about their children online, and they're concerned about their own safety online. So we have a significant agenda in this area, a number of things that are now in the law. I mean,
he's wanting you to go further, though. Will you look at it? That's what I'm asking. Will you look at what he's calling for?
We're looking at a whole range of things. So, yes, we'll look at that. We'll go through a careful, methodical process, as we have done. Can I make the point in relation to the News Media Bargaining Code? That work started in 2018 when the Prime Minister, or the Treasurer as he then was, Scott Morrison, required the ACCC to carry out the digital platforms.
Now, I understand the News Media Bargaining Code. This is something separate, though, that we're talking about here. We're talking about offensive content being posted on Twitter and Facebook, and Barnaby Joyce clearly wants you to go further. Can I just ask... Can
I just be clear, David? Under our Online Safety Act, offensive content, if it meets that test of being cyber abuse of an Australian adult, the e-Safety Commissioner has the power to take it down. She has the power to impose penalties against the trolls who posted it. So,
what about racist hate speech? Does that fit this bill, this category as well? Is that something you want to stop?
Well, again, we'll look at the test of whether it is harmful to the person who's the subject of the post, and issues like whether there's a racist element to it or other elements will certainly weigh into
what if it's offensive to a racial group?
Well, whether a reasonable person would regard it as intended to be harmful, whether it's menacing, harassing or offensive.
Because your government,
if there's an aggressive racist component in that of course will play into those criteria. So the point I'm making, David, is the Act we've just passed through the Parliament, based on detailed work, addresses many of these issues. There is more work to do.
Well, that's what we're talking about. What further are you going to do? Because your government, of course, tried to scrap Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. You're worried about protecting free speech. Now it sounds like you're saying you want to go in the other direction and make it harder to say things that can be considered racist.
The test, David, will be the impact on the individual. If a reasonable person would consider that it was intended to harm, and if it's menacing, harassing or offensive, those words, by the way, taken from an existing provision in the Criminal Code dealing with online content. So what we're doing is leaning in on this issue and all of the issues that arise in relation to online safety. Our government's taken a leadership position on this since we came to government. The Australian e-Safety Commissioner, set up in 2015, is world leading.
We've heard that point.
Indeed.
No, we've heard that point a couple of times. Let me just ask you about what we've heard in the US this week, a Facebook whistleblower who's been giving evidence before a Senate committee there, really about how the company works and suggesting that it sows discord and division in the way that it uses its algorithm to decide what you see on Facebook. Are you one of those who shares the view it's time to break Facebook up? And is there a need for international coordination on this?
There certainly is a need for international coordination. And again, Australia has taken a leadership position, and the Prime Minister has been right at the front of this. Remember, in 2019, the appalling Christchurch mosque massacre, where the murder of over 50 people was live streamed on Facebook. And the Prime Minister, Australia as a nation, has been at the forefront of world efforts to deal with that. And yes, we do need to see more international coordination. And through our international efforts, we will certainly be making those calls, continuing those calls. And our e-Safety Commissioner, Julian Grant, is a strong global advocate for that. But
is it too big? Is Facebook too big? Does it need to be broken up?
Well, what we've seen from the News Media Bargaining Code, amongst other things, is that when you get the law right, you can require them to comply. But Facebook's and the social media platforms' presence certainly raises issues of concerns to all government, including the Morrison government. We are taking a leadership position, as the Prime Minister said, and we intend to continue in international forums to lead on this based upon the work we've done domestically.
A couple of other things. I mean, the Prime Minister and you talking about holding the social media giants to account. Let me ask you about holding politicians to account. The government's proposed Federal Integrity Commission wouldn't be allowed to hold any public hearings. Why not? What's there to hide?
Well, David, the proposed Commonwealth Integrity Commission, which we've been consulting on since we released an exposure draft last year, would have the powers of a royal commission to deal with criminal corrupt conduct at a Commonwealth level. And of
no
course,
public hearings, which is my question. Why not? Why not?
It will go through an investigation process, and then, if appropriate, it will refer material to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and then you go through an open court process.
No, but this commission wouldn't have public hearings. I mean, don't you think voters, taxpayers deserve to see what's going on? I mean, we wouldn't know about Darryl Maguire's business dealings from his parliamentary office and kickbacks he was receiving. I mean, don't we need to see this stuff?
I think the outcomes last week, where a very popular and highly competent Premier stood down, highlights some of the flaws in the model. So we don't support a model where you are presumed guilty unless you can prove your innocence.
She didn't have to stand down.
Yes, we have a very detailed model under the Commonwealth Integrity Commission, which we're consulting on. And there's almost $150 million of funding committed to it.
Yeah,
that will have the power.
So who's presumed Gladys Berejiklian guilty?
Well, the point I make is, as the Prime Minister has said this week...
Well, you said she was presumed guilty. By who?
We've seen a highly popular and very competent Premier, and may I say what an outstanding leadership job Gladys did as Premier, in getting to the point where happily New South Wales is now about to, or Sydney's about to...
We're getting away from the question. You're a little minister, but who's presumed her guilty? Why did she stand down?
David, it's not a controversial proposition to point out that the sudden departure of Gladys Berejiklian highlights the concerns about the particular model with ICAC. So the Prime Minister's made clear we're not attracted to some of the features of the ICAC model. What we do have...
Still don't understand why you won't allow public hearings, though. What's the reason?
Well, I think it's very clear that what we want to do is have a Commonwealth Integrity Commission with the powers of a Royal Commission to investigate suspected criminal corrupt conduct.
That wouldn't include things like pork barrelling, would it?
And when you get to the appropriate point, a brief will go to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and then you have a public process.
OK, none of this would include looking at any pork barrelling, would it?
The scope of the Commonwealth Integrity Commission is to deal with suspected criminal corrupt conduct at the Commonwealth level.
So not pork barrelling?
It will deal with suspected criminal corrupt conduct.
Okay. On climate change, finally, Minister, the Business Council's had a change of heart. It now it no longer thinks a 45% emissions target by 2030 would wreck the economy. In fact, it wants a 46 to 50% target, and it's got modelling to show this will actually boost jobs and growth. Have you had a similar change of heart?
The government's position is very clear. We're carefully working through, as the Prime Minister has said, in a methodical fashion through Cabinet, Party Room, engaging across both the Liberal and National Party. But let's be clear, 20% down on emissions compared to 2005. So our target was 26 to 28%. That was the target we committed to. We've already arrived at a 20% reduction on our 2005 levels. We've got a clear way forward involving technology, not taxes.
Well, you're still working on that plan by the sounds of it. The Business Council's plan to get there, it says, would be enhancing what's called the safeguards mechanism. I see Angus Taylor, the minister, said this would be like a carbon tax. Do you agree? And does that suggest we already have a carbon tax?
Look, I will leave it to Angus as the responsible minister.
Does that mean you don't agree with him?
No, what I mean is that the person who speaks for the coalition about the technical features of any proposal is the responsible minister, the extremely capable responsible minister, Angus Taylor. So I'll leave it to him to make those comments. I can't usefully add to them, but what I can say is we're working methodically through to the plan that we are implementing. It needs to be a good outcome for Australia, a good outcome for our regions, and a good outcome for the environment.
All right, Communications Minister Paul Fletcher, thank you.
Thank you.